when I was leaving, I felt like my biggest complaint was that the ex-Mormon YouTubers and podcasters out there that I was watching were really unfair. That their criticisms were extremely biased, and it really bothered me because as someone who is really sensitive and still really loved my Mormon roots and my Mormon heritage, I couldn't stomach watching those things. So I tried to provide content that was a little bit less abrasive and more genuine, because I felt like a lot of the criticisms I was hearing were not valid.
Yeah, well, see, with me, it's always, I really, really, really hate looking stupid. And so I watch people and I see what things make them look stupid. And I say, okay, I don't want to do that. And I think you look really stupid when you unfairly criticize something. Like when the rules of engagement for the church is different than the rules of engagement for any other organization.
We're here today with Morgan from My Spiritual Life and her husband, Jared. So, and Jared's also a frequent guest on Porch Time with Chris and Flip. So, a frequent guest on My Spiritual Life as well, I noticed. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys and just how there's more than one way to ex-Mormon. And I guess, just kind of hear about where you guys have gone. Where will you go? As Elder Ballard said, like, where have you gone?
Wait, can I first? Oh, yes. Wait, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Go ahead. No, then I was just going to say, introduce yourself. So.
Yeah, well, just as a preface to it all, you said, there's more than one way to ex-Mormon. But first, I just want to line up the way that most people will do it, which is that you just have to hate Mormonism, you have to hate Mormons, you have to hate everything about it, you have to hate your childhood. That's the one way to do it. That's one way.
That is one way to do it.
Yeah, I don't recommend.
Yeah, the way that we do it is that, like, now we love porn. We opened our marriage.
Oh, no. People are gonna think you're serious. That's how messed up things have gotten in this community. Okay, so as an introduction to us, I'm Morgan. I grew up in St. Louis. I met Jared at BYU. I do
in Book of Mormon class.
So we got married 2013, and then Jared left the church pretty shortly after, and then I left a couple years later. And I started vlogging about it. That's what my spiritual life channel is. And yeah, now we talk about religious stuff. I do a lot of interviews for people from various religious backgrounds that have left those religions, but also I talk a lot about just self-improvement and working through perfectionism, black and white thinking, anxiety, a lot of stresses that come from being raised in a high demand religion. Did you want to say anything else about yourself?
Nope. You got it.
He's sexy. That's good. Good.
Okay. Well, okay. So, so I guess you were already blogging. So what motivated you to start your channel?
And I wanted to be famous.
And well, okay. So it's the purpose. So I guess you did describe your purpose a little bit there. So it's not necessarily to bash on the church. Like a lot of people do it. I wouldn't even call it bashing on the church though. There's a time and a place for that stuff, right? Like I went through a phase where it was very fascinating to learn all the things that I wouldn't touch with a 9-foot pole before, right?
Yeah.
So there's a place for it, but it doesn't seem like there's anywhere that helps you. I think people find it not together, right? They kind of leave Mormonism, they get into ex-Mormon world, and then they leave ex-Mormon world and they go all different ways. So there's just not a big group of them. But I think a lot of people do move on. Is my sense.
When I was leaving, I felt like my biggest complaint was that the ex-Mormon YouTubers and podcasters out there that I was watching were really unfair. That their criticisms were extremely biased, and it really bothered me because as someone who is really sensitive and still really loved my Mormon roots and my Mormon heritage, I couldn't stomach watching those things. So I tried to provide content that was a little bit less abrasive and more genuine, because I felt like a lot of the criticisms I was hearing were not valid.
Yeah, well, see, with me, it's always, I really, really, really hate looking stupid. And so I watch people and I see what things make them look stupid. And I say, okay, I don't want to do that. And I think you look really stupid when you unfairly criticize something. Like
Sure.
when the rules of engagement for the church is different than the rules of engagement for any other organization. You have to be principled, right? And so I was very much like, oh, burn it down, like real angry for
Yeah.
a while.
Yeah.
There's probably a good year and a half where I read every single post on the ex-Mormon subreddit, like all of them. I would sort for new and refresh all, I was obsessed. But I remember somebody pointing out the high youth suicide rates in Utah, and they were blaming it on Mormonism. And I was like, okay, yeah, all right, yeah, let's burn it down. So let's talk about this. So we got to we don't want to look stupid, obviously. So let's make sure this is fair. Let's make sure it's actually the church's fault. So what do we got on this? Where's our data coming from? Have we compared it to other highly religious places, suicide rates? Have we thought if there's any other explanation? Because if you want, if you want to get to the truth of something, you have to try every way you can to falsify it, right? And I asked these questions, and I was scowled at, I was chewed out for questioning this. Of course, are you questioning people's lived experiences? And yeah, I am.
Just like you did in Mormonism when they say their experience is that it's true, right? That's not a valid way of knowing things.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I remember having some zone leaders on my mission who told us that, okay, now the new rule is you got to baptize, you got to invite to baptism on the first visit every single time. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. And they're like, oh, well, we received revelation from the Lord that this is what we're supposed to do. And I was like, no, you didn't. And they're are you questioning our revelations? Yeah, I don't think you got that from God. That's stupid. And I got the same kind of response out of that that side of zealotry as I did off of questioning the narrative behind this youth suicide problem. And I wasn't even I was ready for this to be the answer. Yeah, blame the church on everything bad. I'm so mad at it. And I just asked the wrong questions, I guess.
Or the right questions.
Yeah.
Right. No, it's interesting you put it that way, fair, because that's kind of how I feel it can be as well. There's some people that are more fair than others, for sure, that are creating content that are just highlighting church history and stuff. But there's definitely some that are more fair than others. And
yeah,
it's so easy. I think, I don't know. I'd like to say that I'm trying to do a better job of that, but I don't think I'm good at it either. And so my solution has been to maintain friendships across all kinds of differences. So I think it's good to maintain friendships with people that are kind of on the progressive side of politics. I think it's good to maintain friendships with actual members, because it's just the way they act is not the way that it's so interesting. It's just I don't know. That's a tangent. So, but
they
yeah,
act
so
in a way
yeah.
They act in a way that shows that they believe differently than what they say.
Yes.
Well, for example, there's for the most part, it seems like the fundamental thing, people kind of know what a wise thing to do is, or they know what a good thing to do is. They know what a good friend is, right? A good friend is someone that wants the best for you, and they're happy for when good things happen to you, right? And they're not competitive with you, right? You have good friendships. And those friendships don't seem to be divided by ideologies. You can have someone that's more progressive that is a really good friend, and you can have a Mormon friend that's a really good friend too, that they want the best for you. I don't know if that makes sense. How people are acting is way more important than what they say they believe.
Sure it is. I guess I'm willing to be friends with anyone, really. And I don't cut off people for being progressive. It's just that they usually cut me off for not being. So
Yeah.
I don't think I can't think of people who have cut off contact with me for leaving Mormonism, even at my angriest. But like, I can think of a lot of people who won't talk to me or who like deleted me on Facebook or whatever because
For your posts.
they're progressive. So like, I'll talk to anyone about anything. You can come to me
Oh my
and
God.
tell me that you're a nihilist or whatever, and I think nihilism is stupid, but I'll listen to you and I'll hear you out, and I'm what?
Oh, I was just gonna say something.
No, that was all I was really gonna say.
I read this book, Coddling the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt. He's a social psychologist. It's a great book.
I read it.
In
It's
that
good.
book, in that book, there's a study he talks about. I'm gonna butcher it a little bit because I don't remember exactly, but it was about tribalism, right? And how our brains are so inclined to that group think and that group, you know, mentality and like protecting and being worried about people who are in our group. And he talked about how, like, I think they were doing like pricking people with needles and it would show like a label, like if that person was Christian or if they were Republican or conservative or whatever. And they were watching what was happening to that person's brain, and the brain would, like, their signals of distress would get way higher when it was someone that was associated with their group that was like getting hurt, right? And so that speaks very loudly to how biased we are innately that we don't often realize. So I just thought your solution of being friends with people across different backgrounds, across different beliefs and things like that, was like a great solution, because that keeps you from sinking into that tribalistic kind of innate, what would you call it? Like a baseline or whatever.
Yeah. I've also found some flaws with it too, though. Like, I find I can't identify with any tribe or any group. And I wonder if there's some healthiness to just being able to participate with a group and honestly be a little one-sided and biased and make fun of another group, or, you know what I mean? Like, but anytime I see any of that, I'm so skeptical of groups. I can't be fully in any group. Like, I feel it's so funny because in my very first podcast, there was a quote by Maya Angelou that was brought to my attention by Brene Brown. And it's like, you can belong anywhere and no place, something. And that makes a lot of sense to me. But at the same time, it's not easy. Like, it's almost like it's just easier just to be part of a group, choose a tribe, choose a side. Like, how much more fun is it to watch sports when you want one of the teams to win? Like, if you're just, but
very
it's also
boring if you don't care.
Well, it's nice to like look for good sports or good athleticism or whatever and see good play. And sometimes I'll be like at a football game and I'll be like, oh wow, that was good. And my husband will be like, that was the other team. Who are you rooting for? You know, like, I know. It's like, so I don't know.
You're too individualistic, Marty.
Right? Like, I don't know. But I don't know if it's totally healthy though, because it's almost like you need to participate in a group to some level, but maybe you can get that group inclusion from everybody, right? Like the human family or whatever. I don't know.
Sure. Well,
right.
I think, like, I don't know, me and my friends will talk a lot about so I think there's evolutionary reasons behind being tribal. I mean, there's obviously evolutionary reasons, but I would say that, like, along with biological evolution, there's also probably some type of a societal evolution. And
cultural.
I think within the societal evolution, there's a place, like, you need a large portion of your society to be morning people for the most part, but like, you do need a couple of people that are more like night people. That doesn't mean that they're wrong for being night people. They're a little bit different maybe, but like, you need the people to be the guards at night or whatever, to take the night shift.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say, I'd say that it makes sense that there's a large subset of people who are, or the majority of people are probably pretty tribal, but then there's a smaller amount of people who have sort of a disdain for that tribalism, and because I never fit into groups either. Like, I get what you're saying, and there's like always this nagging voice in the back of your head when you get into a group, that every time, you know, they say something about like, well, our group is the best because blah, you just go, yeah, but, you know, and you get annoyed with yourself because, like, you don't want to nitpick everything, but
right.
I think society I think we've evolved to be that way, like that that's what you're supposed to be, and other people are supposed to be, you know, a little bit more tribal. Maybe they should be less so, though. I don't know.
Well, one thing it's done for me is when I see people engaging in that tribal instinct, it's like I don't have a lot of judgment toward it. Like, I hope that they can grow up and gain wisdom and see what they're doing, but at the same time, it's just like I don't know that I've perfected that either. Like, so I don't know. It gives me a lot more room to just be patient with people, I guess, if I see them acting in a way that's biased.
Well, at some point you realize
seems
that,
normal to me.
yeah, at some point
There's a
you
better
realize
way.
that you're a lot better at seeing like ugly behavior in other people than you are in yourself. So
Yeah.
you assume that they're probably the same way too. Like maybe I'm doing a lot of ugly things that I'm unaware of, and they are very much aware of.
Well, and
Right.
there's
So
this,
compassionate. Yeah.
yeah. And there's this
Well,
idea of projection too, where you're noticing things that you actually have a problem with in others a lot. Like that is a thing. I definitely think that's a thing.
That's definitely a thing. I was gonna say, I think that there's nothing more annoying than like a Mormon who's like, there's nothing wrong with Mormonism. But I think that that applies in the same way with ex-Mormons. Like, there's
Yeah.
nothing more annoying than an ex-Mormon who's like, they're wrong about everything. And so I think that trying to find that middle ground is ideal. You know, I think it's more there's more integrity in it. And yeah, it's hard to get to that space.
That's
Yeah,
actually probably my biggest criticism of criticizers is that they will blame the ideology or the belief system or whatever it is on the thinking when it's actually a human thinking problem. It's a thinking problem that goes across all ideas or all religions, if that makes sense. So like, for example, I'll hear people say, oh, Mormons do this, this, and this, and that makes them bad. And I'm like, well, actually all humans do that to a certain level. Like, so you're pointing out the bad human behavior that all humans participate in, and you're blaming it on Mormonism, and that's not fair. Like, does that make sense?
Yes. And I think that's what you should be thinking, because I think that there's a lot of disingenuousness going on when people are criticizing things.
Yeah. Yeah. And that goes true. That's true for, and I still need to talk to Chris, because that's probably, it's, I don't know. I have as much aversion, I guess, to anti-Mormon as I do to anti-woke stuff, if that makes sense.
Well, I
too.
think I
Like,
might have more aversion to, like, well, you know, that's a tangent. Anyway, we're just gonna ride that out.
so there's some people. The thing is, you can run into people who are unfair, like people who jump on everything. Like, so there's this game we're playing right now. It's called It Takes Two, right? And it's this, it's a 2-player game on the PlayStation where you're a husband and a wife. You get turned in. You're going through a divorce, and you get turned into these toys, and you got to work together to solve these problems or whatever. And my friend told me about this game, and his reaction to it was immediately to get on the defensive, because in the game, the woman is the breadwinner and the man is the stay-at-home dad. And he kind of immediately was like, oh, are they trying to, like, is this forced diversity or whatever? Like, and then he was like, okay, you
this is propaganda.
Because
Yes.
it's the year 2022, and somebody is making a video game about maybe don't rush to get divorced. Like, the whole thing is like, don't, like, you're tearing this little girl's heart out, your daughter, and it's terrible on her. Maybe try to see if you can save this thing. And I'm getting all hung up on the fact that they swapped the gender roles. Now, I think they swapped the gender roles on purpose, because I think that it's almost like they know that the man is going to play as the man and the wife is going to play as the wife if you played as a married couple. And so maybe there's more, you can have more sympathy for the opposite gender role or whatever. But it was just, that's an example of people getting like a little bit trigger happy. It's when they don't quite know what they stand for. They just know what they stand against. And that's, like, it's all right to start there. It's all right to, like, look at something and be like, okay, I know that's wrong,
Yeah.
But then you got to explain why. That's when you, like, I don't know, you've talked about it before, the whole an anti-identity isn't an identity. And I think
Mhm.
that's true. So when you see something ugly, you say that's ugly. And you can either try to tear down all things ugly, or you can explain to yourself why, what principle is guiding you that this ugly thing violates. So
Mhm.
obviously that's the direction you have to take your criticisms if you want them to be consistent.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's tough too when there's something laced with propaganda. That doesn't mean there's not something beneficial there too. I think I've heard Jordan Peterson talk about that, how there was he collects all that propaganda art from around his house, and he finds it interesting how the truth still comes through, right? Like, so even though you force the gender role like on there, and it is probably because of the culture we're in, there's probably still some benefit to that game, right? And so if you're not willing to participate at all, then I don't know. Just if you know where you're standing, then you don't have to worry about being sucked in. You already know you already know what you stand for. It is irritating though.
Yeah, it's irritating. Anything's in your face too much. But
Yeah.
I think okay, so talking about ex-Mormons, right? Specifically, how they demonize everything Mormon, everything religious, everything, right? And
Mhm.
and I was in that stage too. One thing I've learned about the psychology behind that is that when we don't know how to validate our pain, then we will make the person or entity or thing that hurt us way more evil than they actually were. And when we set this thing up that hurt us to be way more evil than it actually was, it's a weird subconscious way that we validate our pain.
Mm.
Because we're like, look how awful, awful, awful this thing was. And then we feel some relief. We're like, oh, like, yeah, my pain matters. Like my pain is real. And it's a weird, like unhealthy self-validation going on.
Yeah, and Stephanie, which I think you guys know Stephanie, she was like my second episode, and we were talking a little bit about that, and she put it this way that kind of helped it for me, and she was just like, maybe you have to kind of go through that not seeing any good in it to just separate yourself enough from it to actually be able to see it for what it is, and then you can be done with that phase too. Like maybe it's just a way to objectively be able to objectively look at it and not be, because I mean, if I don't know, I've said this to my husband, it scares the shit out of him, and I've been like, I could totally be like participate in the church. Like if you hadn't left, I could still do it. Like I don't think I'd have a problem. Maybe that's not true. I know it was really hard for the first few weeks after everything collapsed, just because it feels like there's this really huge thing that needs to be talked about and nobody's talking about it, right?
Yes, the elephant in the room. I actually feel very similarly to that. I've been saying to Jared, I'm like, maybe I should take the kids to church occasionally, like to get to know the neighbors more. Like, do I think it's true? No, but I have so little resentment around it now that I'm like, I could sit there and enjoy, whatever. Yeah. And now, like, how realistic is that? I don't know, because the more they talk about Joe Smith, the more I might be like, this was a mistake. Like this is just weird, But I just feel so removed from it that I feel like I can appreciate the good again, and I can kind of like, oh, this is just no big deal,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so this is a good way to segue. Like, what are the things you miss, if anything, about participating at church?
The guilt.
You miss that. You don't feel guilty anymore.
And I don't think Jared misses anything about Mormonism. I miss a lot. I miss the community.
What do you mean? I hear that a lot. Like, what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is I loved feeling like I had my word family, like all these people that I knew that I saw every week. It felt like safe, in some respect. Like there was these people that had your back when you had a baby, they brought you meals, like, and it was also people that you could love, like I can love these people, I can serve these people. And it felt nice that was just organized all on its own, because it's a lot of work to build your own community. It's like a lot easier just to be assigned it, and that can take some of the authenticity out of it, but it was still something I really appreciated. Like we would move, there's always like a new family that we could start building with that, with that new ward. So I liked that aspect. And I will say that I really liked Relief Society. And I really I felt like a lot of women in the wards I was in were very genuine and sharing very authentically, even though they were using a lot of Mormon jargon I don't agree with anymore. I still felt like they were genuine and they shared very deeply, and I felt very connected to them in those instances. So that's some things off the top of my mind, is just that community aspect.
I don't know if there's anything I really miss about it. Like there's a lot they get right. But it's more like going back to that never being part of the group thing, because I'm very much the same way. I don't really care to be part of groups. I have like a few friends, and I like being around them. They challenge me when I'm being an idiot, and it's not much of an echo chamber, but like I guess that's probably a way that I need to change a little bit, is that I grew up not really seeing value in the whole community aspect of it. And now I'm kind of like, I guess that's something that
Can be valuable.
I should value it, even though I can't quite bring myself to do that. And so, like, to me, there's some things that would probably be beneficial to like taking the kids every now and then, but it sounds like such a chore to me. I don't know. The times that we've gone back to church haven't been like triggering or anything like that. They're just like boring.
I could be doing something better with my time, right?
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
I think the last thing I'll say about community wise is I do feel like the ideal reason you want a community support is because if you have that underlying safety net of feeling like you have support in your life, you will be lifted to higher heights than you could be on your own. Because you can take much riskier behavior. You can do much scarier, more courageous acts than you otherwise could, because you have that safety net that has your back. So you don't need Mormonism for that, but
right. Yeah, you can cultivate. Yeah, that's true. You can cultivate like your own community, like in friend groups and stuff like that. It's just a lot harder to do, for sure. And I would argue that the way that the church does it by like geographic region, you're going to get a bigger variety of different ideas, because it's people that live close to you, and they may be like, for example, you could have someone that's like left-leaning in their politics and stuff, and so you're going to be able to hear what they think about a lesson that at church, like if you're in your Sunday school lesson, and you're going to be able to hear everybody's opinions, which could be beneficial. They might bring something to light that you didn't know about, right? Whereas if you're going out and cultivating your own community, you might have a higher chance of being an echo chamber, right? Maybe, I don't know. The other thing, so I just wanted to add to that. The thing I think I miss the most is, at least weekly, I was thinking about ways I can improve myself. And now it's not that I don't think about that anymore, but just that ritual, I do miss that. Like, I'm fascinated by other ritualistic practices from other religions, because I feel like they do it probably better than Mormonism. But like sacrament, like just that time where they try to make it as quiet as possible so that you can reflect and be like, and when you think about renewing your baptismal covenants, it was always like, well, think back on the past week. Did you accomplish the things you wanted to accomplish? What are those things you want to accomplish? Like, are you getting there? Kind of just checking in, and not being in autopilot all the time. So
I agree with that. I like rituals. I think we are very tribalistic, ritualistic human beings. And I think if we don't have rituals in our life, then we make rituals out of weird things that we probably shouldn't, like our cell phones and things like that,
We're very ritualistic, but like I guess my sticking point is kind of like, in order for the ritual to have any value, I have to actually believe in it. That's because I think that sacrament can be very valuable to some people, and even in like Catholic Mass, there's a lot of symbolism and stuff like that. But like I have to
Right. I don't think I could go to participate and it be the same way now. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that's what
Yeah, I
it
know.
is.
So that's what I'm saying. I don't know really what the answer is because, like, you probably, I'm pretty convinced that people are just by and large religious. We're probably better off if people are going to church. Like, your society is probably better off if more people are going to church. And, but I don't want to do it. And I don't know how to tell somebody to just pragmatically go to church because maybe it'll be better for them. Because, like, in order to go to church and get anything out of it, I would have, like, I'd have to believe that the things in the Book of Mormon really happened. I'd have to believe that Joseph Smith really saw God, you know? I can't quite wrap my head. We had this discussion
Did you try praying about it?
Yeah. No, we had this discussion on Porch Time, and I think you and I were pretty much on the same page, and Chris and Flip were really trying to explain this idea of metaphorical truths, right? I know, like, Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris were arguing about that, and I can't get my head around the idea of a metaphorical truth, like something that, like, going to church, like, if everybody going to church would make society better, then, you know, Jordan Peterson might say that's metaphorically true. The church is metaphorically true. But, like, and maybe you could have metaphorical truths, but if they contradict literal truths, I don't know how you can call them metaphorical truths. You know what I'm saying? Like, because if it's metaphorically true that going to church is great and Joseph Smith was a prophet or whatever, but literally he wasn't. So
that makes no sense to me. I would just, why not just say going to church is helpful? Why do you have to say it's metaphorically true? I don't know.
Well, that was our big discussion.
Oh, I see.
Well,
Jordan
okay,
Peterson.
so here's something. What if there's something going on that we don't understand, right? And that's where, like, the faith bit comes in. And the thing that I think, I read this book called The Sin of Certainty by Peter Enns, and he's a Christian that kind of he definitely goes through a faith crisis. And he stayed Christian. He got kicked out of the church he was going to because he wasn't a literal enough believer, right? But he talked about the sin of certainty and just how being certain about something is actually the problem. Like, I would say if the certainty didn't exist at church, I could actually stay there. The thing that I felt guilty about is that everyone is aiming you toward being sure about the core tenets. And it's almost like you shouldn't actually say what the core tenets are, because once you, like, solidify it, then all of a sudden it can be not true anymore. So maybe the true thing is the going to church and the practice bit, and they shouldn't rely so much on the certainty of what it is that is, but it's hard to congregate around an idea when it's not solidified too. So it's just paradoxical.
If Joseph Smith had been a lot more theoretical, we'd be in a different place, right? But he was so literal with all of his, his explanations of things. Yeah. But, well, and I think what you're hitting on too is that certainty, with that certainty comes that arrogance, but also that ignorance, of, like, okay, I'm not listening anymore because I have all the answers. And that's cult-like behavior. And you can see that in politics. You can see that everywhere. And there's nothing that's more absurd to me than someone who just thinks that they know everything in any situation. And that's, I feel like that's how you can define a cult, is they have that certainty of we have all the answers and that us versus them mentality. Mm-hmm. Anyway, yeah, it's not fun.
Yeah. All right. So back to the little brainstorming thing then. So what is it that you wish the secular world could do better then? I guess it's probably the things that you liked, maybe. I don't know. But yeah, the secular world.
What could the secular world do better? Stop pretending they're not religious.
Tell people to be Christian. Just kidding. We are so jaded on this because I think that Friedrich Nietzsche, said that God is dead, we killed him. And I think he's right. And I think we killed him without a backup plan. And I think ideally people would found their lives on morals and principles that were solid and had solid footing, but they don't, because, like you said, they're religious. Then they turn things like politics or other things into religion, or activism into their religion. Yeah. And it just creates a big mess.
Yeah.
It kind of just the whole idea of deriving an ought from an is, right? That, because you've got like I've read another unpopular opinion. I've read a lot of Ayn Rand, and like I like a lot of what she has to say, but also like she seems to have this naive faith in rationality. Like she thinks that you can derive morals from rationality, and Sam Harris has said the same thing. And clearly, he's wrong about that. 'Cause, but what I would say for like the secular society, they love to pretend that they're not religious, and they are. I saw this discussion between Jordan Peterson and Lawrence Krauss, and Lawrence Krauss is a really good physicist. He's an irritating person. I can't stand him. But
I'm impressed with him though that he was even willing to talk to Jordan Peterson. To be honest,
I was very impressed. I didn't think that he would be, but like I watched that thing, and he explains to Jordan Peterson that no, you don't understand. Scientists love to be proved wrong. They love to be proved wrong because that's what science is. It's constantly changing based on new information. It's like no, that's what science ought to be, but it's fraught.
That's not scientists. That's not scientists. That's science. That's not scientists.
Yeah.
Scientists are humans.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, and he's like, Jordan Peterson was like, I don't think that's true. And Lawrence Krauss was like, let me give you an example. For the longest time, it was believed, I personally believed, that most physical matter was found in bodies like planets and stars and things like that. But I made a discovery that actually most physical mass is like floating in space. And see, I was happy to be proved wrong there. I was like, yeah, but you proved yourself wrong, man. That was like you're acting like you're taking this ideal version of what a scientist would be, somebody who is like grateful to be proven wrong because it just brings you closer to the truth, and saying that's how it is right now. That's what this is. And that's how a lot of the secular world treats science. And they kind of just say, trust the science, follow the experts, whatever. And follow the experts. Like, I don't know how they can't see parallels there, and they try to, it's like they pretend that science and scientists are already the ideal version of what they could be.
Right. And obviously, it's really easy. And this isn't knocking the idea of science. Like, obviously, we have a lot of cool stuff because of our ability to do that. And I think it's taken a community of people to do that, actually. It's not one person that was able to develop a lot of the things we enjoy as far as ease of life. But
what can the secular world do better? Tell people to not trust their feelings. That would be a good start.
Be consistent about that, though, right?
Wait, what do you mean?
You said to not tell people to not trust their feelings.
Right.
And be consistent. Like they're more than willing to actually do that for religious people.
Yeah,
that's
they'll say that.
That's funny. Yeah. I didn't even think of that in context.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting, though? The whole lived experience thing, I have mixed feelings about, because obviously if people have different experiences, they're going to have a different way of looking at something and bring something to the table. Like that whole idea of diversity is not necessarily bad. The problem with the way it's being implemented is that it is not diversity. It is, you are going to think like we think, and that's how we know you're diverse. And it's like, no, that's not, like, it matters more about what you think than what your experience was like.
Well, and you're not allowed to have an opinion on a certain topic unless you have directly been impacted or lived through that experience, and that's absurd. Like I'm white, but I can have an opinion that slavery is wrong, like just because I'm, like they'll, because you'll hear people say, well, you can't have an opinion about that thing because you're not that thing. And it's like, what? How is that the case?
Luckily, you can be anything though now.
So now, I can be a black man,
yeah,
and I can have an opinion about slavery being wrong.
That's anytime somebody tells me when talking about abortion, no uterus, no opinion, I just lie to them and tell them that I have a uterus, and they say, "Oh shit, well, mind your own uterus. And I'll be like, see, you didn't really think that in the first place.
Mind your own uterus.
Yeah, like
I'm gonna start saying that to you.
yeah.
Sure, shut up. Mind your uterus.
Mind your own uterus. Yes, next fight you guys have, please do.
I'm gonna keep that one locked and loaded.
Yeah. Okay, so are there things that you wish Latter-day Saints could do better? Like, I mean, we've talked a little bit about them, but
I'll be honest.
be honest.
Mormons are absolutely terrible at being honest.
Just be
Not
honest.
that they're not these like pernicious liars or anything, but there's so much pressure on them to represent the church that I don't know, they can tend to like put forth this persona of like, I don't have any problems with you because I'm such a peaceful person or whatever. Tell somebody when they're being assholes. Mormons don't do that. They're nice, and people act like that's the best part about Mormons, but no, they're too nice. Stop being nice. Like,
Be honest. Be more honest.
It's not authentic and you don't grow. Yeah. And I would say I think primary problem with Mormons is that they don't trust themselves. But it's kind of like it's one of those problems that like I don't know how you fix it without like viewing the church as not perfect.
Well, the way you do it is by just, I don't know, they very much misunderstand the whole contention is of the devil thing, right? That they make that out to be like never ever engage in contention. It's the same as if you were saying violence is just always wrong, never do it. Like, no, it's seeking out violence is wrong, seeking out contention is probably wrong, but like violently
Being willing to contend with something that's not right is a good thing.
Yeah, if somebody's doing something wrong, as if something's hurting somebody else, then you have to jump into contention. And Mormons are very, very slow to do that. They're very risk averse and conflict averse, and they need to cut that shit out.
Mm-hmm.
That's not where I was taking it, but yes, I do agree with that. I was saying trust yourself as far as like decision making and self-doubt, because they will do that thing where it's like they got to make a decision and they are so afraid of making the wrong decision. And I say this because I was one of those kind of Mormons. It's probably not all Mormons that feel that way, but where I was so afraid of making a decision that I would want to offload that decision to someone else, like to my bishop or my husband, or pray and like, God, like tell me exactly what to do with my life.
Google LDS.org and see if you can find the answer.
Right. And so I think that I wouldn't even entirely blame this on the church. I would blame it somewhat more on culture, like the social culture that exists right now of like you are treading in such dangerous territory if you make a mistake, you know, and you get so paralyzed by that because you're so afraid of making a mistake that you're just going to spin in your self-doubt instead of like just trying to be rational, like, oh, hey, let's try this. And then we'll work it out later. And that was just so hard for me. I was paralyzed with decision-making. So I think one thing Mormons or Mormonism could do better is to give you some room to breathe. It's okay to make mistakes. Like just try your best.
Yeah. Emphasize the struggle, not the destination.
Yes. Yeah.
I think,
yes.
Well, I guess you're probably asking that in the context less of like, what could individual Mormons do to better their life, which
just
is
the Latter-day Saint world, you know,
like what could they do better?
Even if it is the culture, like what could there be better there?
Well, so you're about
this is
you're all about like you're all about bridging gaps and stuff like that. So you're saying like what could they do to bridge the gap between people who've left? Or
no, this is on the same thing of things you miss. What can the secular world do better? What can the Latter-day Saint world? That's kind of you're answering it. This is on topic.
Yeah, I'd say that. I mean, that's that whole emphasize the struggle. Like I grew up thinking that you weren't supposed to struggle publicly, you know. You were supposed to do that all on your own and then present the finished product to the church on Sunday.
Yeah,
and
that's
I
actually
mean their whole thing. Like that's one of atheists will have this criticism of Christianity where they'll be like, oh, you're saying that like a murderer could be forgiven on his deathbed and go to heaven or whatever. And they say it like it's this sort of checkmate. But then the Christians are always like, yeah, that's the point. They'll be like, you saying he deserves it? And I'm like, first off, I can't say what people deserve, but him not deserving it is sort of the point. Like, that's kind of what forgiveness is. So they'll emphasize that. A lot of Christianity will do that. They'll emphasize this struggle and how like nobody's perfect. And Mormons say that, and they kind of just give it lip service. You know, they kind of just say like, oh, nobody's perfect. But perfect.
Yeah, that definitely exists. That is something I learned. I've learned in the last couple of years is you get stuck if you don't move. Right. Well, that's stupid. Okay. So what I mean is
very profound.
Yeah, you get stuck if you don't move. But the point is like not being able to know what the right decision is and just avoiding it and not making a decision. You're stuck if you're doing that. And so having the courage to just make a move, even if it's wrong, and you find out it's wrong and then correct, like, I mean, there's some decisions we make in life that are bigger than others, that it's a bigger mistake, right? But I think that if you don't address things, the dragon grows. It gets bigger,
Right.
Like,
There's the mistake of not making a choice too.
Just being stuck, I think, is one of the worst things for a human. I think that's how I would describe the last 3 years. And it wasn't all bad, right? Like there were some times where I felt fine, but when I was practicing, I was losing my belief in like supernatural things, right? And so, and I felt stuck. That is the best way to describe it. Like I felt like I couldn't talk to anybody about it because that would be me admitting that I have a problem. So I kind of wanted to pretend there wasn't a problem. I listened to Lord, I Believe by Elder Holland all the time because he was basically saying in that talk that you can lean on his testimony if you don't have a testimony. And then that would keep me going. Like it would keep me acting kind of, but it's like half-hearted acting because I just knew I had a problem and I couldn't fully address it. And so I would say that's the best way I can say it is. Here's the thing. If I'm wrong about leaving the church, I think it was better for me to leave the church and act on something and do something than it was for me to just maintain that being stuck forever, like for the rest of my life. Like if I've made a mistake, and maybe it's a big one, and maybe I'll end up back in the church, right? I don't know. I doubt it. Like I'm really happy that I was able to just move, but that's one. Sorry. So, anyways, that's what that reminds me of. With what you guys were just saying is just thinking for yourselves and like just not being stuck is how I thought of it.
I remember when I was contemplating leaving the church, and that was back when I was still really scared of what people thought. And I was kind of meditating on it. And I was like, what am I going to do? Like, I don't know what to do. And like the thought that was coming to me was like, I can't leave. I can't leave because I can't handle what all these people are going to think of me. And that's when it clicked for me that I was like, now I have to leave. I have to, because even if the church is true, I can't stay here because I'm afraid of what everyone thinks. That's so wrong. So I have to let go of what everyone thinks before I can even like decide if I want to be Mormon at this point, because the problem might not be Mormonism. The problem might be just overcoming this fear of what people think. And that can really mess with how you live your life. And so going back to that self-doubt, right? When you're trying to make a decision, you don't know which decision to make. You got to think of like realizing when you're stuck in those moments of self-doubt, you got to see it as a growth opportunity, because you have to get over that fear of making a mistake. And the only way you will get over it is by making a decision and being okay, and seeing that you're going to be okay with what the consequences are. So you have to treat it like, okay, it's not this issue that's the problem. It's my self-doubt that's the problem. It's my fear of failure that's the problem. And I can overcome that by making a decisive decision. You know what helps me with that too? Just it's kind of a little tangent, but really last thing about that was that I would set a deadline. I'd be like, I have to make a decision about this thing by this day. Or sometimes I'd only give myself 30 minutes. Like, you have 30 minutes and then you have to decide. Because otherwise I would just think about it for eternity and never make a decision. And it would stress me out, the fact that I hadn't made the decision. So those things were kind of helpful to me to kind of get better at that.
Are there ex-Mormon truths that you have found out are not true? Like, and if so, what are they? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. An ex-Mormon truth that seems to, they'll never outright state it, but is absolutely throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, it's they are wrong about everything is what, it's the feeling that I got when I left. And particularly, and the ex-Mormons are turning around on this because society in general is kind of slowly starting to turn around on this, like the issue of porn. I remember having left the church. I was at my friend's house and he was asking me, he had left a long time ago and we were all, you know, drunk, and he's like asking, he's asking about standards and stuff like that. And he broached the subject of porn, and I was like, you know what, I still, there's something, I don't think it's good. I don't like porn. I think there's something wrong with it. I can't quite place my finger on it. And he's like, that's just your Mormon conditioning, man. And I was like, I don't think it is, man, because I'm drunk off my ass right now with you. Like last week I was at your house and I did shrooms and showed you the temple handshakes. And I have no guilt about that. But this, I think there's something wrong here. And I think they're very quick to call things conditioning. That is one of my biggest criticisms of wokeness, is that they do kind of think everything is socially constructed. Everything is socially enforced. Any norm we have is because of social enforcement. Like there is no real difference between men and women. That's all, you know, a patriarchal structure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the problem with porn is it's not the porn itself. It is the fact that you're wasting time. It's that you are on autopilot, that you're not like actively engaged with what you're doing. And this is a thought I've had, and it's the same problem. I don't have a porn problem. I have a YouTube problem. So like I'll get on YouTube and just waste hours when I'm like, man, I could have actually done something. And sometimes I'm learning stuff, so it isn't all that bad. But it is, I think you don't feel good when you're on autopilot. I say that a lot because I think we have to kind of be intentional about what we're aiming for and then making progress toward that thing. I think that's when we feel the best. And I don't know that there's necessarily like, I don't know what's true about that. I don't know what like the meta story is of that, but I do know that like when I'm aiming for something and getting closer to that thing and seeing progress toward that thing, I feel better. And I don't think you can have that doing these activities that are not that, even video gaming, you're aiming for something like passing off a level or something, but I don't know that you have that with porn as much.
Right. With porn, with video games, with YouTube, the thing that those all have in common is dopamine, right? Dopamine's that chemical in your brain that floods you with that happy feeling. And so part of like what makes being present so hard, right? Because I think for me, like I strive to have goals I'm working toward and to be present with my family, you know, when we're having family time, and be present with my kids and give them that attention. And the problem that porn and YouTube and phones and all those things have that make that so difficult is that dopamine. The amount of dopamine that your brain releases when you're watching something so stimulating as porn or a video game or things like that is an absurd amount. And it's more then is released when you play violin or when you play with your kids. Like, and so it creates this feedback loop in your brain where you actually become addicted to those other tasks and you stop doing the things that are more meaningful because they don't give you as much of a dopamine sensation. They've done a study with rats where they hooked up, there was like a lever that the rat could pull that would release dopamine, and the rat pulled it over and over and over again till they just pass out from exhaustion. They would just pull it over and over again because it would release it. And I feel like that's what we as humans, our brains tend to that. I've heard Jordan Peterson say once, like, people say, why are all these kids on drugs and alcohol and doing these things? And he's like, why are there any people that aren't? Because that feels way better. That feels way better, than the alternative. And one more rat story that's really interesting about that is that for rats that are living in their normal habitat, you cannot get them addicted to cocaine. You can't. And that blows my mind. Like, because they're doing their thing. They're working on their survival. They have purpose. They have meaning. And and that's just so interesting to me that it's when you're devoid of that meaning and purpose that things can get scary,
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'd say an ex-Mormon truth that I had to unlearn was, and they'll never say this explicitly, but hedonism. It's kind of just, do what feels good always.
I see.
Then just give in to the natural man. The natural man is not a real thing.
Yeah, basically something like that. And because you do feel pretty constrained when you're Mormon, because they have some good rules and they have some dog shit, worthless rules. And you feel very constrained. And then once you get out, you're like, I can do anything. And I don't, like, I can go smoke cigarettes or whatever. Like, no, maybe you shouldn't.
right. Or I can go sleep around.
Yeah.
So
I think most ex-Mormons understand that to some degree, even if they don't say it, because most of them don't go out and start smoking cigarettes. But a lot of them do think, like, because I've talked to so many people who, as soon as they leave the church, they think of all of, usually sexual, they think of all of the like sexual conquest that they missed out on in their late teens and early 20s and however long they were in the church, and they just fixate on the life that could have been, as if it would have been a lot better. Like, if only I could have slept around a bunch when I was in my early 20s, that would have been awesome. Like, yeah, and then you'd just be totally fine right now. Like, you just be like, yeah, I got to do that. Now I'm fine not doing it ever again. That's just a thing you could stop doing once you're 28 years old.
Just a phase. You grow out of it.
Yeah.
I have a couple more. I don't know if I can bring this up or not, but
I can cut it out later if you want.
Well, you cut it out if you want to. I remember when I was just leaving the church, and there was a vlogger talking about being ex-Mormon and all the reasons why, and how she had this experience in church where, because her boyfriend at the time was, I don't know, Mexican or something, and she was just railing on how racist her ward was. And the only example that she could give was that someone said, hey, just so you know, like the Spanish branch meets at this time or whatever. And I was like, what? Like, that's not racist. Like, that person's trying to do a nice thing. And I grew up in St. Louis. So, like, there was a lot of Black people that were in my ward and that were my friends. And, like, one of my very best friends, like, growing up, like, he was in all my Sunday school classes with me. And I didn't think that Mormons were these evil racists that the ex-Mormons were claiming that they were. And I've never been convinced otherwise as of yet.
Excuse her. She hasn't read D'Angelo. Okay. She has some work to do. She has a knapsack to unpack.
Sure. She has some white fragility, I can tell right now.
Yeah. I'd say one of the things that you had to unlearn is this, and this is a big criticism I have of Dylan and wokeness in general, and you see it in the ex-Mormon world, is he constantly is harping on this systems, not people, right? And you're criticizing the church as a system. You're not criticizing the individuals within it. And the problem with that is it's very black and white. but that's one of the problems with it. It's black and white, and it's also you can blame anything bad that happens on the system. Anytime, like if there's a Mormon that goes out, there were those kids in, I think it was Draper, that were walking around in blackface this year for Halloween. And if you think systems not people, you think, oh, it's not their fault. It's the Mormon church's fault that they wore blackface, because it's just this easy. It
dressed
feels
up as Lehman and Lemuel.
it's lazy to me, because you're like, oh, I can blame every terrible thing that these individuals do on Mormonism, even if there's not really anything in Mormonism that says, yeah, go out and wear blackface, or go out and say the N-word a bunch of times, or something like there's nothing in Mormonism that says go out and treat other people poorly. So when people do that, they're assholes. But that's a John Dehlin thing. When that whole Brad Wilcox thing came out, and he was and John Dehlin was really going after not Brad Wilcox, but the church, like these beliefs that he has, that the faux pas that he committed here, it's the church's fault, not his fault. We gotta, I don't know, I'm going on, but that's.
I got you.
You had another one, Morgan?
I do. I got two more. Being a woman in Mormonism was way, way harder than being a man in Mormonism.
Oh, I have that one too. That's good.
I don't think that
I didn't want that for myself.
Yeah, well, I think it was different. I think it was just different. It was hard in different ways, and I think it's extremely arrogant to be like, man, you can't complain. We had it way worse than you. Like, oh my God, you are insufferable. Like, do you have friends with that kind of attitude? Like, that's so unkind. It's not a competition. And that's the thing, is it is a competition, right? It's a competition to see who's the most victimized. I don't agree that women had it harder than men. I think it depends on the category. When it comes to like certain aspects, it was harder for women, and when it came to other aspects, it was harder for men. It was hard. I'm sure it was hard for men to feel this mantle of responsibility as far as like financial, and it was hard for them to feel like they had to have so many kids when with all that pressure of being the financial holder. And then the priesthood stuff, like, yeah, women always complain like men got the priesthood and we didn't, it was so unfair. It's like, okay, yes, but like men were treated with this mantle of responsibility of like your righteousness could be called into question at any moment, and you may have to lie so you don't look bad, and that's just so uncomfortable, so I think that there's difficult things on both sides of it, and I don't like that ex-Mormons treat it like a competition.
Well, I wouldn't say that the stuff that ex-Mormon, like on the Lynn, what they say about women is necessarily not true, because it's definitely, they're pulling at and they're criticizing things that really are a problem. My problem is that they don't highlight equally that what you were just saying, like that.
Exactly.
There are some guys in the church have it tough. Like, yeah, it's a single income household. If you're living the traditional TVM lifestyle, your wife is staying home, you have a crap ton of kids, and it can feel like you're a paycheck. And then on the like lifestyle side of it, which doesn't feel good, and then so like just as much as like women feel like a maid service and a cook, men feel like a paycheck too. And it's like,
yeah,
I don't know. And one thing I've noticed since I've gone back to work is that I miss the time I had to like do play dates and then have other adult time, where now I have some adult time with my coworkers, which is also a good thing. I'm enjoying that, but I don't have enough time for my mom friends anymore, which sucks too. Yeah. So there are some, like, and that just goes back to the unfairness. Like, it's just not fair sometimes.
We should probably mind our own penises and let Jared talk about it.
It's my lived experience as a man. I think my issue with the way that they talk about this kind of thing on Mormon stories is that if somebody were to raise the issue, well, in some ways it's harder on men because you can bring up things like we're expected, like we have to go on missions.
Yep.
And women don't.
I didn't know that, by the way,
Awesome.
until I had an argument with my husband about it.
Really?
Yep.
Oh,
But if you want, I'll share it after you're done, though. Go ahead.
well, that's just one of the things. It would have been nice to have an option or feel like it was optional. But we go to priesthood session and like I found a talk by Quentin L. Cook that is just LDS women are amazing. That's the name of the talk. And he just talks about how great women are. But then we go to priesthood session and they're like, you guys really suck. Okay. Stop looking at porn so damn much. So I could point that out and I can already hear it in my head. It's the voice of Cara Burrell saying, yeah, patriarchy hurts everybody. Like that's the feminist response is always like everything is the fault of patriarchy. And when you say, well, this and this sucks for men, they'll be like, yeah, patriarchy. It's like, what kind of shit system have men set up to where it sucks for them in multiple ways?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't feel like I have institutional power over you right now. And I got to go out for 2 years and talk to people about Jesus and hate every moment of it.
So I thought, because we don't have the same lessons from like 12 to 18, right? Like we're separated during young women's and young men's, right? And I didn't realize when I was getting fed our stuff, the guys were getting fed their stuff, and I didn't realize it wasn't a choice, because from my perspective, it was like, yeah, I want to marry a return missionary, right? That was the highest thing. And maybe it's because like I have family members that didn't go on missions that I knew they were good people. So I didn't think that like I could have possibly married someone that didn't go on a mission and it wouldn't have been the end of the world. So maybe it was just my own, my own family upbringing that gave me that attitude. But
I would say probably, because I was like, no, I have to marry a return missionary.
Yeah, I don't know what you were missing.
It was definitely had to be a member. Like I remember I remember it had to be a member. Like I wasn't willing to, and if I knew somebody that wasn't a member, I wasn't willing to have them convert just for me to marry me. They had to actually have a real testimony coming from the Holy Ghost, not just converting. You know what I mean? So there was that. But so anyway, and then we girls like pray about it, right? If you want to go on a mission or not. So I kind of assumed the guys were getting the same thing. I told my husband, I was like, hey, you could have prayed and said no and could have got a no. And he's like, that's not true. Like, that is not true. Find that anywhere. And I took the challenge and I scoured LDS.org trying to find a place where like you could pray to go on a mission. It just doesn't exist. Like a worthy, healthy young man, God will not give you an answer to stay home. It won't.
Yeah. That's,
and I was like, the first time I realized that was after I was already ex-Mormon. So anyways,
that's funny.
I feel bad about that.
Patriarchy's a bitch.
I had one more, and so with sex, right? In Mormonism, there's this concept of like you don't have sex till you get married, right? And when you leave it, they're just like all bets are off, right? Just do whatever you want, open your marriages, ruin your life because sex is hot. And I think I'm really starting to lean more toward that ideal of like, I don't necessarily go so far to Mormonism as like you can't have sex without being married, but I think you shouldn't have sex without being very, very, very committed to somebody. And I think that there's a lot of good reasons for that Mormonism never taught us, because they were just like, don't have sex because it makes Jesus sad.
Or make you feel guilty when you F up, right?
Emotional damage and, reasons like that. And so I lean more toward the Mormon view than I do the ex-Mormon view when it comes to sex.
Yeah. And it's interesting. It kind of goes back to the porn thing. I think part of the thing of like when you you mess up, like you have this goal maybe to not have premarital sex and then it happens, I don't think that's the end of the world, right? Like you can still have a goal to not be promiscuous. Is that, I can't say certain words.
Yeah.
So you can still have the goal to be choosy, right? And then also, like it's not like you won't make it to the celestial kingdom. Like, so there are some things in Mormonism where I can see it really messing with people, and that's not good. But also, yeah, free for all doesn't seem right. Like if I were to hope something for my kids, it's that they would wait till they were married, honestly. Because I feel like it worked out well for me, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't want them feeling guilty if they don't choose that, but I'm more worried about their well-being, and I think there's some wisdom to being choosy. So
I think so.
there was one thing I wanted you to tell your story. So what, you have a band, right, that you hang out with?
Yes.
You found some communities outside of your, like, they're not based on ex-Mormonism, right? Like you found something to like kind of congregate around. Talk about that.
I got sick of ex-Mormonism pretty quickly after, I mean, a year or two, I guess. It started to exhaust me because I only had ex-Mormon friends, and it started to like weigh on me so heavily that like these were the only kinds of conversations that we could have was about Mormonism, and I was getting so sick of it. And then one day I met a friend that was never Mormon and was never ex-Mormon because she was never Mormon. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was so refreshing to hang out with her, because I was like, I don't have to talk about it. Like I could just be me. And I'm like, who the fuck am I? I don't even know. I'm so excited to find out. Like, and so that showed me like I really like needed some different friend groups. So I started a band with a couple friends, one ex-Mormon friend, one Mormon friend, and that was super fun. And then I also got really into pickleball, which was a great other way to make a community, because again, half of them are Mormon. Actually, most of them are Mormon. Now that I'm thinking about it, there's less of us that aren't. And it just feels good, like, because we don't talk about religion. We talk about pickleball, like, because that's what we're there to do, and that brings us together. And then I also, have like my mom friends, and so I've kind of been establishing these different communities based off of common interests instead of based off of common trauma, right? And in my band, my Mormon friend was the one that was like, hey, let's do a gig together at my ward talent show. And I was like, hell yeah, like that sounds super fun. Like, and so me and the other ex-Mormon gal and the Mormon friend, we all went to her ward talent show, and we played together, and it was just super fun, and I loved it. And then she invited us, she invited our band, to go play at church as well. And I was just excited. I was just excited to have someone to play with, and excited that I belonged to something that made me feel good, because music is a big passion of mine. And so I didn't care that it was at church that we were playing. I was just happy to have listening ears that were happy that they didn't have to listen to each other sing, because most of them are bad singers. So, win-win.
That's awesome. I love that. I think that's really cool. And I think most of us realize that that's what we need to spend our time on and do. And I think people do it, but maybe if someone needs permission, they're listening to us, that'll help them get encouragement to do that. I don't know. I do feel like you can get stuck in like the ex-Mormon bitterness and resentment, which I went through it. And so I get it. And I'm not going to say anyone's wrong for going through it, but hopefully you can grow.
Well, part of the problem that goes against you is that Mormon history is just like uniquely fascinating.
Yes,
like, people
that's true.
Grow up, people who didn't even grow up Mormon, they'll get into it. It's where it fascinates even your normal person. It's gonna really envelop somebody who grew up Mormon.
Yeah, and has never learned any of it before.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
true.
and lastly too, that I think reason we hold on to that ex-Mormon identity longer than we should is because for a lot of us who were raised Mormon, we didn't have a personal identity, and Mormonism was something we'd cling to have as a pretend identity. So then when we lost that, it felt so scary because it was like, I don't know who I am without this one like shred of identity that I had. And that's why it's easier for people to leave that didn't have their identity so wrapped up in it. So what I've seen is the more insecure you were, the more Mormonism you latched onto it for your identity. So then the more you latched onto ex-Mormonism for your identity, because it's scary not knowing who you are. And it feels safer like having some kind of identity to cling to, even if it's an anti-identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's probably some truth to that. So what do you hope for in like ex-Mormon world content? Like, don't you wish that we could just talk to the John DeLynn types? Like, I have this, I was so excited when RFM did his debate with Midnight Mormons. Like,
Yeah.
there's like an unwillingness to talk to each other. I don't know. I wish there would be more crossover, I guess.
Well, so there's a few people who are willing to do crossover, right? There's like RFM is pretty good about it. And there's Jonathan Streeter, who's been
Yeah.
several times
Yeah, that's true.
done stuff with Midnight Mormons. But like, I don't know, there's this, I always, John DeLynn, I've heard him complain about not being able to get active Mormons on his show. And I'm like, but like, you berated Rod Meldrum for like 4 hours, calling him racist and homophobic and telling him he should denounce his prophet. So like, why would any Mormon talk to you?
Yeah.
You're
You
not an interviewer at that point. You're just scolding somebody, and that's stupid. You looked like a jackass who's scolding a child. And this guy came on here in good faith. I listened to that. I just happened to listen to that one because I hadn't listened to Mormon stories in a long time. And then I saw this Heartland model pop up, and I had heard about it. I was like, that sounds goofy as hell. This guy thinks that all of the Book of Mormon took place in North America. This is amazing. I got to listen to it. And I listened to the whole thing, and they barely even touched on his theory. They just chastised him for the Book of Mormon. They'd be like, "Oh, the Book of Mormon says that the skin of blackness was a curse," and he's like, "Ah." And they were just, "That's evil, right? You would denounce Brigham Young, right?" And he's like, "I'm not going to do that." And they're like, "Wow, super racist." So of course you're not going to have crossover.
Well, and okay, so I haven't been around. I didn't realize how long you guys had been out. So I've only been. So right before COVID is when our collapse of belief happened, and then we were able to like slip away because COVID, right? So,
That's the way to do it.
So when I first was listening to Mormon stories, I was addicted, and so I mean, he was only releasing not that many. I didn't feel like, and so I was listening to a lot of old stuff. Because in between the stuff that was new that was coming out, and I remember having this feeling of like his old stuff was not woke, but his new stuff was, and that's the way to word it. I don't even like using the word woke, but it's the easiest. Just
yeah, I'm with you.
It became very preachy.
Yeah, just you could tell there were ideas of critical theory like just enveloped in there, right? And by the time I'd left the church, I already was well aware of like James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian and doing the hoax papers and all that stuff. So I was aware of what kind of was going on with academics and stuff and how anyway, I don't know, to be honest with you, like, I don't know. Maybe I'm in my own little cult. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I'm right about all this stuff, but I'm definitely critical of social justice, and the idea of systemic racism really bugs me. It feels like a faith claim to me.
Well, it's a faith claim, and it's a claim of original sin. It's something you can't get away from, and it's just a brand that's stamped on your forehead from birth.
Yeah, like as I feel like as I'm becoming a better person, it's better to not assume that people mean anything by things that might offend me. Like maybe I can improve myself and frame it in a way that it's like I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think the idea behind like having a critical lens and stuff is like the opposite of that. You give people not the benefit of the doubt. And so they say something innocuous and then all of a sudden you're like, that was racist. Like I don't feel like that hurts people that think like that more than anybody. Like if you have a mindset that the world's out to get you, you'll be able to find lots of ways the world's out to get you. Like it's easy to be a victim.
Right. It's assuming the worst intention from what someone said instead of the best, the best interpretation you could give it of like giving them some leeway. It's like, I'm going to just assume you had the worst intentions when you said that. And also, I'm never going to forgive you for it, by the way.
Right. So anyway, I just remember going through his stuff was so good because it did make me feel like I was not crazy. And I hear stories and it was, it was validating. I'm going to use the word, I hate the word, but yeah, when he was interviewing people and I was just like, wow. Wait, sorry, what?
He was an interviewer back then. Now he's not.
He's a preacher. So that was one of my favorite episodes. It was like 4 episodes in a row. They had Brian Handels. It was like my favorite apologist ever because he's so wacky. And like he knows more about Mormon polygamy than probably anybody. And he comes to just the dumbest conclusions about it. And it was funny to listen to. And John interviewed him back in the day. And the guy said some crazy shit about how like, well, why he didn't need revelation to start baptizing people. So why would he need revelation to start practicing polygamy? And like John gave him some reasonable interviewer pushback saying, okay, but like maybe a detractor or like maybe if somebody were to say this, what would your response be? But he was really like even-handed for the most part, if I remember right. But
I felt like he did a good job too. He would also, and he would also do a pretty good job of like, if someone was describing how they felt like they were leaving, he would give the thing that your Mormon brain would do, like the excuses your Mormon brain would make for them doing that thing. And then he'd push them on that thing too. I'm trying to think of an example, but it was really nice because those same questions kind of came into my head and then he would vocalize it. And it's like, oh, that's really cool that he was able to ask them that question that I would have wanted to ask them too. Like, how did you know it wasn't Satan? Or that's a stupid example, but something like that.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, I found his newer stuff was not as fair. It wasn't, I don't know. It's it wasn't.
Jared said it's religious. Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, I don't know. It would be interesting to have a conversation with John Dehlin about that. I wonder if one thing that's been interesting, I've developed a friend group and there have been people that will say to me privately things that they won't say when the whole group's around. I don't think people are as religiously on board as it looks like, but people are afraid to say what they think, which is really sad. And I think as long as people just kind of voice up and not to be a jerk about it, right, but just be like, I'm a little skeptical of that or whatever. I think we need to have more people just kind of be like that. And then maybe we'd find out that the ex-Mormon John Dehlin Facebook group isn't as culty as it really is. You know what I mean? Maybe there's just a few loud actors and that's it. And it's just, there's nothing to be afraid of.
But I would just say that the loud actors are the ones that get what they want.
They're pandering to these people just because they're so loud. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, well, it's the squeaky wheel gets the oil type thing.
Yeah.
And
I don't know. I've been...
It's the Mormon in John Dehlin that doesn't want to deal with the controversy, right?
No, he just wants to be like he'll have whatever opinion it takes to, get views and stuff. But
maybe
I don't know.
Maybe he's gone down this road so much that it's like a a thing of like audience capture or something, right? Is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
yeah, I was actually about to say that. Like there is such a thing as audience capture where you get brainwashed by what your audience is wanting and expecting from you, and that can really throw you off the rails, which is why I think it's so important as a content creator that you have to really like point your compass somewhere that like it has to be you have to be aimed at something so strongly that you can subvert the crowds that are cheering you on in the wrong direction and the people that are shouting you down for saying the truth. You have to be really founded on some principles that can keep you guided in the right direction, because there will always be someone who cheers you on. Always, no matter what you talk about. You could talk about how, you could find people that would cheer you on when you say terrible things, like actual racist things. There would be people to cheer you on for that. And you have to be aware of that as a content creator. So I think it takes a really strong person to be able to withstand that audience capture. And that's not an easy thing to do for anybody.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's even possible, to be honest. Like, I'm okay that I have no followers.
Right.
One thought on that, and I've thought of this. When you hear why John Dolan keeps doing this, he says it's not for the money, it's for all of the messages that he gets of people saying, thank you, thank you, thank you. I've heard RFN say the same thing, and I've heard Bill Real say the same thing. And I'm just like, oh, that's not a very good reason. I'll be honest. I've had some messages too. And so it's like, okay, I appreciate the messages, because I also hasn't had not nice messages. So it's like, the reason I don't think that's a good reason is because Joseph Smith probably got people saying the same thing, right? And Elder Nelson or Prophet, whatever, not Elder, the prophets and all the apostles probably get lots of messages as well. And so messages of people saying thank you isn't really, does that make sense? Like, that's not a reason to keep doing it.
But it's
because
the most virtuous reason.
No, it's the attention whore inside of people.
No, what I'm saying is that appears to be the most virtuous reason you could possibly be doing this, is to change lives.
I see.
So you can't say like, yeah, I do it for the money, which I'm fine with John Dolan making money. Like, I'm a capitalist, for hell's sake. Like,
I don't have a problem with the money making aspect either. And I'm just saying, I think what I'm saying, if you got messages all the time saying thank you, thank you, thank you, that would be hard to not take as evidence that you're doing something good.
Right, which is the whole audience capture thing. Yeah.
I'd say that like my suspicion is that John Dolan cares. He likes the fame more than the money, but he needs them both. That's
I don't know. I don't know him good enough. I actually think that if I knew him in person, I think he'd probably be a decent person. Like, he seems.
We're not saying he's an indecent person. We're saying that he's hungry for fame. That doesn't make him a bad person. You know what I mean?
I don't think that's. Yeah. I don't think so, though. I guess I don't know. Maybe.
That's okay. That's okay. We don't have to agree.
I don't.
But I will say that it's definitely a potential for anyone in social media work. Whatever. It's a potential that hunger for fame can cause you to devour yourself for your audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you lose yourself. Yeah. Some guy that had like a video where he ate stuff, and
the after school video. That's what we're both
after school.
But after school did a video talking about audience capture and how you can be brainwashed by your audience, and they used Nick Perry as their example, which is a perfect example, because he started YouTube eating vegan and playing violin, and he's
the biggest
400 pounds and he's a disaster, and it's all to please his audience and to make money, right? Because now he relies on that money for being this massive wreck. So
yeah,
I'm not shitting on John Dolan for saying that he likes the fame. I think that
I understand that.
I think that's a thing that people want. So I don't I don't fault him for wanting. I'm just saying that's my suspicion is he values that more than he values the money. I think he does value the money. Like,
I don't think it's wrong to value.
We should get him on. Maybe I should reach out to him so we can ask him.
yeah,
do it.
I'm sure he'll do it.
I
I've
don't
seen them
think it's-
say the last like several times I've had John Larson on. I've seen them do that stupid thing where they're like, "And we'd love to get a reasonable conservative voice on here." They're like, okay, define reasonable conservative voice. Okay, because when you say reasonable conservative, you mean okay, conservative that thinks that Mormonism is completely bullshit, says that
Do you
all
think they
Christian
would take
values are
a
terrible,
Bill Maher
thinks that trans
liberal?
women are women, thinks all of these leftist talking points. And like, you're not
Very
talking about a
reasonable.
conservative. Shut up.
Well, and I will just add to that. It's not wrong to want fame and money. I think most people would want those things if they could have them. Not everybody, but I think a lot of people would. And I think it's wrong to betray yourself for those things. And I think it's very easy to betray yourself when you don't know who you are and you're not founded on solid principles.
Sure. Okay, this is what I was going to say. When I look at ex-Mormon content creators, I actually feel bad for them because I feel like I don't know that I'm going to be here for very long because I don't think it's the best thing for me. And I feel bad that John Dolan's been in this for 10 plus years, right? Was it 20 years?
Yeah.
And he could have moved on in his life and he's chose to stay here because I think he genuinely thinks he's helping people. But
and I'm sure
I don't know if he's created a place where he now is forever stuck in that phase of leaving. You know what I mean? It's like I have these mixed feelings of like wishing he would just move on for his own sake. But also he does create interesting stuff too, right? Like I'm glad that he's created what he's created and I've been able to go back and look at some of the stuff, right? So it's like this selfish desire is keep doing it, and this not selfish desire is like I wish he could like go have a normal life too, right? Like I don't know, but
I relate with that. Yeah,
same thing.
I do feel like it's hard to find a career that can grow with you personally. You know, that can be hard to find. Because we're always growing. We hope we're always growing. And that, he's really locked himself into talking about it. I kept expecting him to start bringing on more like of people from other religions, you know, because that's what I started doing next. Because, you know, I did some ex-Mormon interviews and I was like, I want to see like what else is out there, what, you know, and I thought he was going to start doing that, but he never really did. And we
had Chris Shelton on.
So I'm just going to read Mormon Stories, founded in 2005. And this is their objective. Providing support to Mormons who are transitioning away from either Orthodox Mormonism or Mormonism altogether, with particular emphasis on minimizing anxiety, depression, and occasional suicidality that can accompany transition away from religious orthodoxy, reducing the number of unnecessary divorces attributable to Mormon faith crisis, creating a community of support for liberal, progressive, and post-Mormons. So that's his number one goal. His number two is build greater awareness regarding accurate Mormon history, doctrine, theology, so that active believing Mormons and investigators can make informed decisions regarding their investment in engagement with the church. 3, identifying opportunities for growth improvement within the LDS Church within broader Mormon culture. So I actually share in those goals, right? And I don't feel like he is adequately doing those because of how political his content has become.
I agree.
I feel like by choosing sides on politics, and it's interesting because people will say it's not political.
Like, that's one of their favorite things to do is they got to make every issue like a life or death thing. Like if you want to have that discussion about like, if you really want to have a discussion about transgender issues.
And it's weird, by staying neutral, you have taken a political stance to some people.
Say you're with us or against us.
Those are more radical people.
If you're against it, then like if you're against any of the like transgender activism orthodoxy, then that means that like it's not political. You are literally causing harm. You're causing people to end their own lives or whatever.
Right.
It's every
so-
single progressive issue is not even political. That's one of the tactics they love to use.
Right. And so I feel like these aren't actually what he's acting on. Like if this were actually his goals and he were wanting to help people that were in a faith crisis, then he wouldn't alienate the majority of Mormons who are conservative. Like,
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
don't understand how he could possibly be successful at doing these things when he's alienating and making people feel as much shame as the Mormon church makes people that had premarital sex have shame. He has them feeling that much shame for being conservative and being skeptical of critical theory. Like I so anyways, and actually I've gotten to the point where I actually don't necessarily have this goal. I would like people to be informed. Like I like that idea of people making informed decisions before they donate 10% of their income. There are sneaky ways that I feel like the church is able to get more and more money. So they don't tell you how much money to actually donate. They say, oh, it's between you and the Lord, how much that is. And so when you get certain personalities, they will do weird things and donate a lot more money than they really need to be donating, just because it's almost like if you have the thought that you could be donating more and you ignore that, that is the Holy Ghost trying to tell you donate more. And then
yes,
it's just a bad
as
thing.
a college student, I paid so much fast offerings, like because I wanted to feel good about myself and I wanted like, blessings.
You're
and
probably making up for me not paying any at all ever.
That's what it was. It was like, you need to make up for Jared's lack of, love.
I think there are certain personalities that are going to do that because they feel like that's what God's telling them to do. And so by them leaving it open, it's really, they think they're probably doing a good thing because then it helps someone that can't make that much, pay that much, still feel worthy, maybe because they've negotiated. But I would rather them just say what it is. I don't know how to explain it.
I disagree. I think you're giving them too much good intention. Maybe I'm wrong. You're like, well, maybe it's like because they don't want people to feel like they have to pay too much. I'm like, no, it's because they know that their audience is filled with a bunch of pansies who are going to pay way too much.
Maybe that's true.
Morgan was asking me, she's like, so I don't know, Marty, like, what's she like? And I was like, okay, you know how I do that thing where I think that I give people too much benefit of the doubt? And she's like, yeah. I was like, yeah, Marty does more of that.
It's true. I don't know. And maybe I've had the other thought, like maybe not standing for anything and like just letting people be where they're at is not always good too. Like maybe you should stand for some things. Like I don't know. It's I'm not self-confident enough in any of my views to feel like I'm right and someone else is wrong though. Like I just
Right. But at least you're willing to discuss it all and willing to have the courage to not know, right?
There's like a stage that you have to go through, obviously, where you're kind of just looking at things, and people continually do this. You're looking at things about different ideologies or different groups and saying, I don't like that. That's bad. I don't like that. I don't like that. And you can criticize it and then eventually sort of say, why don't I like that? Well, I don't like it because it violates this core principle. And then you realize this is a principle that like is probably sacred to me,
Probably immovable.
Yeah.
I mean, probably.
And then you feel more confident because you're like, oh yeah, like honesty, like no one can convince me that honesty isn't the right way to go. And then you can kind of like, okay, so people who are doing this thing, I feel like I have the confidence to criticize them because I believe in honesty or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we need more people around that aren't as cynical. It's just like it's difficult to like have been in this place for as long as I have and not become very cynical about people online being willing to have discussions with me, because even the ones that want to come off as very reasonable and very willing to discuss things when I bring up concerns, they'll be like, oh, well, that's interesting. And then they just ignore me. You know, that's like the best case I've ever gotten is they say, oh, that's interesting. And then that's the end of it. They don't want to touch it because I said some of the unsayable things. And then,
Right.
I don't know.
Well, that's my last thing. It's funny too. I don't think I'm as conservative as I'm definitely not as conservative as I used to be. Like definitely moved on gay issues, even trans issues. I'm skeptical of the trans movement as a movement, but I don't have a problem with adults doing that like I did.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's interesting because but I feel like I'm definitely on the outs as far as the Mormon stories community goes.
Oh,
I mean, I can
yeah.
tell I am because the
Rel-
posts that I like versus the posts that everybody else in there is liking are not the same.
And well, relative to everybody else there, you're a fascist. Ask any of them to describe.
Definitely uneducated, right? Like I need to educate myself.
Yeah, as soon as you start listening to people's lived experiences, then
I don't understand.
you'll start having the right opinions.
So I really like 3 practices, right? And everybody on there, I am the only one that I feel like regularly participates. I'm the most conservative one that participates regularly. We'll put it that way. And it's interesting because every time I've kind of had my 2 minutes, more than once I've got the question, well, how do you think you would feel if you were Black? They want me to try to put myself in their shoes, right? And it's interesting because they're not hearing what I'm saying, and I'd be curious to know how you would feel. And so here's one example. Someone said that they were in kind of the boonies part of a town out in the rural, and it was a Black person, and some guy came up to him and said some remark about, hey, where'd you get that tan or something like that? And he said he was explaining how racist that was. And I was like, that's interesting. I don't think that's racist. And so and then anyway, so that was during his 2 minutes. And then when I had my chance to do my 2 minutes, because it was a Jordan Peterson circle that I had created, and I was explaining, I can't remember how it came up, but someone had asked me the question in that same circle, well, how do you think a Black person would feel in that situation? And I basically said, I was like, I think it kind of depends on their political ideology. Because I think there's certain political ideologies that would be offended by, and others that would be like, oh, that person, either they wouldn't be offended by it, or they would give them grace and be like, oh, they probably aren't around a lot of Black people and don't know that's offensive, right?
So are you trying to put forth the flagrantly racist idea that Black people are not a monolith?
That is, I do think that it kind of goes, it's political. It has nothing to do with skin color. It's all politics.
Wait, you think that different Black people have different opinions politically?
Yes, I do.
Those people aren't really Black people.
I'm starting to suspect that you also haven't read D'Angelo.
My husband has.
Don't. It's terrible.
It's when I want to kind of read critical theory too. There's this idea, right, that it's like they'll tell you to educate yourself, right?
Yeah.
And it feels the same to me as someone saying, well, you can't know that Mormonism is not true until you read the Book of Mormon and pray about it. You can't talk to me about Mormonism until you do the homework.
Yeah, right? and then if you do it and you don't get an answer, they'll say, yeah, you didn't pray right. Yeah.
No, that's the thing with this critical. Like I read White Fragility, and I've read Unpacking the Knapsack, and I don't know, a few Kimberly Crenshaw essays, but it's never enough. They'll be like, oh, it's a good start. I'm like, look, how much of my time do I have to devote to a thing before I can safely say this is a dog shit idea?
Well, you can actually, I think it's coherent. It's a coherent worldview, kind of like Mormonism is a coherent worldview. I just don't think I don't think it aligns with reality as much as
it's Mormonism.
I don't think it aligns with reality. I just don't. Like, there's just some tenets there that you're taking on faith that I don't think lead to good ways to interact with people.
I guess I'd have to define coherent, because I don't think it is coherent. And it, like, just right down to definitions where they say the definition of racism within critical race theory excludes white people from experiencing racism and states that all white people are racist inherently. And that's not a coherent thought.
Yeah, but you have to understand that what they mean by racist is not what you mean by racist, right?
Yeah, I know, that's what I'm saying, is they have this weird definition that it excludes.
They don't actually think racism, like if you talk to them, they don't think that people should be fragile about being racist. It's not like actually condemnation, right? It's like this, you couldn't help it. You were born in this system just like everybody else, right? So
yeah, they sort of say that, but they also understand how people respond. Like they understand what racism means to everybody else, right? So it's the Mott and Bailey thing. Okay, so they have their definition of racism, which is this thing like, well, everybody's racist. You're born into it, it's this thing you have, and it's an easy thing to criticize because you say. Or no, they have the normal definition of racism, right? That's like prejudice based on race. And if they call you racist, you say, I'm not prejudiced against black people. Okay, so piss off. And then they retreat to the Mott, which is that whole, it's just everybody's. Because what I'm saying is that they understand how the word racism is perceived. And so them having this obscure definition of racism that almost nobody uses and nobody responds to accusations of racism as if it's just this, it's just this normal thing.
Well, and then the other thing, it would be so much better for them to use the word like biased, like everybody is biased. That would be that's what they mean by when they are saying racist, right?
Well, kind of, but it's still only applies to white people. And that's sort of, it violates. Like one of the biggest things that Robin DiAngelo demonizes in White Fragility, and all critical race theorists will demonize this, is the idea of colorblindness, right? And that's sad. Which is basically Martin Luther King Jr., like, treat me as a man. They had those signs that say, am I not a man? They didn't say, I am a black man. They said, like, I'm like you, okay? Like, it's this, like, I hold this Western liberalism to be this sacred sort of principle that critical race theory's definition of racism violates completely. Like, it's absolutely illiberal.
Mm-hmm. Martin Luther King Jr. said, every time my white brothers will draw a circle around, like, to exclude me, I'm going to draw a bigger circle to include them.
I would rather look at black people as an individual than
that's racist. That's colorblind.
Well, and that doesn't even mean that they can't tell me, oh man, what's really hard about living in Utah is there's not a lot of black people and I feel this, and this way. Like, they can still do that.
Right. Yeah. But right. I agree.
Like, there are some things, it's so interesting because I think what people think critical theory is like admitting, teaching the history of slavery and stuff like that. Like,
well, that's
everybody is okay with that. Like, and everyone is even okay with hearing what your perspective is. And maybe I can be a little bit more aware. And it kind of goes back to the Elder Bednar talk where you try not to be offended, but try not to be offensive. Like, both things can happen and we could live in a better place. It's not just one or the other.
Not to be offended.
Well, that's again the whole Mott and Bailey thing. Critical race theory itself, the definition of critical race theory is a Mott and Bailey that they'll retreat to, and they'll be like, okay, yeah, we want to teach critical race theory here or whatever, and you say, no, I don't like critical race theory, and they retreat to the Mott definition, the definition of the word that nobody in their right mind would be against, which is like, we just want to teach the real history. Like, what do you mean the real history? Oh, like that America had slaves. Yeah, I learned that already. I learned it in school. I remember learning about slave ships. It was very uncomfortable because it's like an evil practice that happened. But we learned about it. What do you mean the real history?
Yep. Well, that was fun. Thank you guys for coming on. I'll do a sign off because I always forget to do that and then I have to cut it off. Like, sorry guys, I'm not very good podcast producer. So yeah, anyway, thanks for coming on.
Fun discussion. Thank you.
Cool. All right. Well, have a nice night and we'll call it good.
All right. See you, Marti.
Peace.
Come on. Any last words, you guys?
Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button if you like
Oh,
what you
shit.
saw.
I'm cutting that out.